It sounds like someone's cutting a tree, branches or something outside. I don't think it's being picked up. I did read a story before and listened, and it didn't sound like I heard anything, but hopefully you don't, but it's still distracting as hell. Alright. I'll start with the first one. Alright, here's a short one. It's called What Do You Come For? There was an old woman who lived all by herself, and she was very lonely. Sitting in the kitchen one night, she said, "Oh, I wish I had some company." No sooner had she spoken than down the chimney tumbled 2 feet from which the flesh had rotted. The old woman's eyes bulged with terror. Then 2 legs dropped to the earth and attached themselves to the feet. Then a body tumbled down, then 2 arms and a man's head. As the old woman watched, the parts came together into a great gangling man. The man danced around and around the room. Faster and faster he went. Then he stopped and he looked into her eyes. "What do you come for?" she asked in a small voice that shivered and shook. "What do I come for?" he said. "I come for you." And then in parentheses it says, "As you shout the last word, stomp your foot and jump at somebody nearby." Let's see. Alright, this one's called The Thing. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together on this particular night. They were sitting on a fence near the post office talking about one thing and another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Suddenly they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark it was hard to tell for sure. Then it was gone, but soon it appeared again. It walked halfway across the road, then it turned around and went back into the field. Then it came out a third time and started towards them. By now Ted and Sam were scared, and they started running, but when they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty sure they saw it, for it was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm going to try and touch it, then we'll know if it's real." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes sunk deep in its head. It looked like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed, and again he and Sam ran, but this time the skeleton followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it. It stayed out in the road for a while, then it disappeared. A year later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam sat up with him every night. The night Ted died, Sam said he looked just like the skeleton. So it's kind of like a little doppelganger type action, I believe. This one's cold as clay. A farmer had a daughter for whom he cared for more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim, but the farmer did not think Jim was good enough for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the county. Soon after she left, Jim got sick and he wasted away and died. Everyone said he died of a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death he could not tell his daughter what had happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life they might have had together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on their uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "My father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." "Is there anything wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things and they left. She rode behind him, clinging to his waist. Soon he complained of a headache. "It aches something terrible," he told her. She put her hand on his forehead. "Why, you're as cold as clay," she said. "I hope you are not ill." And she wrapped her handkerchief around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. Her father was startled to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable to look for them. The horse was there. It was covered with sweat and trembling with fear, but there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, her father told the truth about Jim's death, and quickly he went to see Jim's parents. They decided to open his grave. The corpse was in its coffin, but around its head they found the girl's handkerchief. Alright, I'm gonna do the haunted house. Here's the picture from it. Gotta show the pictures of these, they're super creepy. The haunted house. One time a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they always would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. And just before midnight he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth, back and forth. And it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn. When the door began to open, he jumped and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, so the doorknob turned, and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" That's the young woman. The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again slowly. Step, 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 step. Closer and closer. Step, step. And it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet, like he said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you, and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets, and then she had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing it. She told how her lover had killed her for her money, and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her left hand and lay it in the collection plate at the church next morning, and he'd find out who had murdered her. And she said, if you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where my money is hid, and you can give it to the church. The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down toward the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped and rubbed and scraped and tore at the bone, trying to get it off. Then he went screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house one midnight, and the haunt's voice voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. He did, and he found a big sack of money, and where that haunt had held on to his coat, the print of those bony fingers were burned right into the cloth. It never did come out. Okay. Here's the hearse song. Don't you ever laugh as the hearse goes by, for you may be the next to die. They wrap you up in a big white sheet, from your head down to your feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. All goes well for about a week, then your coffin begins to leak. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out. The worms play pinochle on your snout. They eat your eyes, they eat your nose, they eat the jelly between your toes. A big green worm with rolling eyes crawls in your stomach and out your eyes. Your stomach turns a slimy green and pus pours out like whipping cream. You spread it on a sliced bread, and that's what you eat when you are dead. Oh, there's that. That's the one I started before. Weird stuff like that. This one's funny. I think I've read this one. It's called Wait Till Martin Comes. An old man was out for a walk. When a storm came up, he looked for a place to take shelter. Soon he came to an old house. He ran up on the porch and knocked on the door, but nobody answered. By now the rain was pouring down. Thunder was booming and lightning was flashing, so he tried the door. When he found it was unlocked, he went inside. Except for a pile of wooden boxes. The house was empty. He broke some of the boxes up and made a fire with them. Then he sat down in front of the fire and dried himself. It was so warm and cozy that he fell asleep. When he woke up, a black cat was sitting near the fire. It stared at him for a while, then it purred. That's a nice cat, he thought, and he dozed off again. When he opened his eyes, there was a second cat in the room, but this one was as big as a wolf. I looked at him very closely and it asked, "Shall we do it now?" "No," said the other cat. "Let's wait till Martin comes." I must be dreaming, thought the old man. He closed his eyes again, then he took another look, but now there was a third cat in the room, and this one was as big as a tiger. He looked the old man over, and it asked, "Shall we do it now?" "No," said the others. "Let's wait till Martin comes." The old man jumped up and jumped out the window and started running. "When Martin comes, you tell him I couldn't wait," he called. They get like that. I think this is the one with the big toe. Alright. Now I'll read a few from this one. This one's in much better shape. I've come across these quite a bit over the years. Back when I was in elementary school, you could buy these at the book fair. Let's see. There's more creepy artwork. This one's called Strangers. A man and a woman happened to sit next to one another on a train. The woman took out a book and began reading. The train stopped at a half-dozen stations, but she never looked up once. The man watched her for a while and asked, "What are you reading?" "It's a ghost story," she said. "It's very good, very spooky." "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked. "Yes, I do," she replied. "There are ghosts everywhere." "I don't believe in them," he said. "It's just a lot of superstition. In all my years, I've never seen a ghost, not one." "Haven't you?" the woman said, and vanished. That's... This is right. It's called Is Something Wrong? A car broke down late at night, way out in the country. Driver remembered passing an empty house a few minutes earlier. I'll stay there, he thought. At least I'll get some sleep. He found some wood in the corner of the living room and made a fire in the fireplace, covered himself with his coat and slept. Toward morning, the fire went out, and the cold awakened him. It'll be light soon, he thought. Then I'll go for help. He closed his eyes before he could doze off. There was a terrible crash. Something big and heavy had fallen out of the chimney. It lay on the floor for a minute, then it stood up and stared at him. The man took one look and started running. He had never seen anything so horrible in his life. He paused just long enough to jump through the window, then he ran and ran and ran and ran until he thought his lungs would burst. As he stood in the road panting, trying to catch his breath, he felt something tap on his shoulder, and he turned and found himself staring at two big bloody eyes and a grinning skull. It was the horrible thing. Pardon me, it said. Is something wrong? This one's called Thup Thwup. After Sarah went to bed, she saw a ghost. It was sitting on her dresser, staring at her through two black holes where its eyes had been. She shrieked, and her mother and father came running. "It's a ghost on my dresser," she said, trembling. It's staring at me. When they turned on the light and it was gone, "You were having a bad dream," her father said. "Now go to sleep." But after they left, there it was again, sitting on her dresser, staring at her. She pulled the blanket over her head and fell asleep. The next night, the ghost was back. It was up on the ceiling, staring down at her. When Sarah saw it, she screamed. Again, her mother and father came running. "It's up on the ceiling," she said. When I turned on the light, nothing was there. "It's your imagination," her mother said and gave her a hug. But after they left, there it was again, staring down at her from the ceiling. She put her head under the pillow and fell asleep. The next night, the ghost was back. It was sitting on her bed, staring at her. Sarah called to her parents, and they came running. "It's on my bed," she said. "It's looking and looking at me." When they turned on the light, nothing was there. "You're upset over nothing," her father said. He kissed her on the nose and tucked her in. "Now go to sleep." But after they left, there it was again, sitting on her bed, staring at her. "Why are you doing this to me?" Sarah said. "Why don't you leave me alone?" The ghost put its fingers in its ears and wiggled them at her. Then it stuck its tongue out and went, that's what it is. To make this sound, put your tongue between your lips and blow. It's called giving some. Oh, it's the raspberry. I should have read that first. I can't do it, especially with gum in my mouth. This will be the last one here. It's called Hello, Kate. Tom Connors was on his way to a dance in the next village. It was a long walk through the fields and woods, but it was a soft, sweet evening. He loved dancing, so Tom didn't mind. He'd gone only a short distance when he noticed a young woman following him. Maybe she's going to the dance, he thought. He stopped and waited for her. As the woman got closer, he saw that it was Kate Faraday. They had danced together many times. He's about to call, "Hello, Kate," when suddenly he remembered that Kate was dead. She died last year. There she was, all dressed up for the dance. Tom wanted to run, but somehow he didn't seem right to run from Kate. He turned and started to walk away as fast as he could, but Kate followed him. Took a shortcut across the field, but she still followed. Still she followed. When he got to the dance hall, she was right behind him. There was a lot of people standing outside, and Tom tried to lose Kate in the crowd. He worked his way to the side of the building, then squeezed up against the wall behind some people. But Kate followed. She came so close she brushed up against him. Then she stopped and waited. He wanted to say, "Hello, Kate," just the way he did when she was alive, but he was so frightened he couldn't speak. Her eyes looked into his, and she vanished. That's a classic one, Harold. He was in the movie it's some reading requests there, reading some scary stories. If you guys like it, I've read from these before in the past once or twice. I might have repeated